Hello, my name is Tarai and I'm from the UK, but I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I think emotional health is being able to check in with yourself, to understand how you're feeling, and taking the time to actually reflect and deal with any anxiety you may have, or even things that you're really happy about. That's what I think emotional health is.
Hey family, welcome to another episode of Hearts and Minds Aloud. I'm excited that I can be here with new content for you, even happier that you could make the time to listen to the content that I have. Today's episode is a bit of a deviation from what we've done so far, in that it doesn't look at traditional mental or emotional health topics like we've done so far, but it evaluates a topic that is just as important, and that would be the subject of learning. In the conversation, we look at all the things that impact learning in one way or another. So we talk about culture, language, interest, workload, and the varieties of things that we could do to improve the learning experience, make it easier even if you can. I had a resource person who also happens to be my friend, and she was willing to share her experiences, insights, and perspectives on the concept of learning based on all of the work that she's done with children, especially in the area of learning. I hope that the episode helps you learn something about learning. Yep, pun intended. Dr. Bridget Cody, thank you very much for deciding to join me today. And it will be nice starting with you telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yes, I'm Dr. Brettjet Cody. I am a school psychologist, an educational psychologist from the U.S. Currently, I'm working as assistant professor at a university.
Which one?
At the United Arab Emirates University.
Oh, cool.
Previously, I was working as a school-based clinical child psychologist.
Okay.
Like I said, my degree is in school psychology, and so basically I was applying mental health techniques to children in the school setting. And if you're wondering how I became a psychologist...
Yes, I was actually. That would be my next question. But tell us, please.
Okay, sure, sorry.
Okay.
Basically, growing up, I noticed that some of my classmates had some challenges in the classroom. For me, learning was really easy.
Okay.
I'm not to brag or anything like that, but learning was really, really easy for me, and things just came naturally. And so I was wondering, why are my classmates struggling? And I began to realize that it's more than just what the teacher's saying. It's more
So
than
you're
what's
one of the
learning.
ones that I would have hated in class, right?
You would probably been very jealous of me. You're right. You've been very jealous. She's really smart and gets at things really easily, so it's fine. And so just noticing that my classmates really struggled, it made me want to help them in some way. And then I realized that a lot of people struggle with things outside of school,
Right.
that influences their education and their learning. So this is why I want to be a school psychologist, educational psychologist, and help other people to learn.
Right. Sounds very noble. Great. And it's nice that you've actually made that happen. Now, so I know that you've been doing this for a while. I'm curious as to, the cases that you've seen. If you had to, which one stayed with you? Like, are there any remarkable cases that you've seen that you would want to share or you'd like to talk about?
Unfortunately, the most difficult or remarkable cases, or ones that really stuck with me, are the ones that are the most tragic or the most sad.
Right.
I often work from like a kind of systems perspective, a family systems perspective. And so the most difficult were ones in which a family member has betrayed a child in some way, whether
Right.
it's abuse or like emotional abuse, physical, sexual abuse. Those are the ones that are really difficult for me, because your family is often your kind of rock, your
Yes.
steady place.
Yeah.
And to know that someone's
safe
family,
place.
your safe place, and to know that someone has been hurt by their family is really rough. And so I've had a couple of cases in which they tell me where family members have done things to them that were inappropriate or very harmful to them. And those are really the ones that stick with me.
That must be hard, like almost emotional for you, I believe. Are there any of these cases, like is there an example of a client or a student or a child who's taught you a lesson, like working with them taught you a valuable lesson that stayed with you?
There has been, kind of continuing from the clients in which they have had difficult times with their families. Oftentimes with these clients, I would feel like, oh, you poor thing. Like I would feel something, some kind of reaction to them. But to see their resilience
Yeah.
and to realize, like it took me a while, but I realized that sometimes we see a situation or an event as like the worst thing that could ever happen for someone.
Like something you can't even get over. Or
Something you cannot get over, you cannot bounce back from. And then remarkably they have.
Right.
And so to think that someone is forever damaged, forever broken by an event, it's fallacious. Like, people can improve themselves, people can have a different perspective, and they can be empowered by events that may have occurred to them and want to improve themselves.
And you draw some inspiration from there too, like.
Yes, I have, especially the resilience that you see.
Of course.
In individuals.
Of course. Okay. So now, coming to, going back to what you mentioned earlier about learning and, people having a hard time learning. One of the things that I found interesting is the role that language plays in, learning anything new.
Yeah,
right?
Language is a big factor into learning new things. Yes.
I think so. So what are the components of language? Like, if you spoke about language, what are the things that you would pay attention to, or you would highlight about language? What aspects of language play a role in learning?
As a professor, you want to pay attention to how much the individual is able to receive and to take in and comprehend what you're saying, as well as how much they're expressing and how they can express what they know to you. So oftentimes people, maybe they understand well, but then when you ask them what they're saying, they have a difficult time of expressing that to you.
Communicating what they understand.
Exactly.
Right?
And so it makes it difficult for you to actually understand how much they understand.
Of course.
So that someone may understand everything, but when they have difficulty expressing it and communicating how much they know, then it can be a challenge for you as a professor, as a teacher.
And then there's some sort of a gap.
There's a gap, and then you don't really know where the gap necessarily is.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Would you say, so you spoke about receiving, and I know there's such a thing as receptive language, or there's receptive language and then
expressive language.
Expressive language. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So the difference, receptive language, think about it as like what the person is able to bring in, and understand and comprehend. So how much they're receiving in the conversation or in the classroom.
Yeah.
Whereas expressive language is how they actually get things out and they actually express themselves. And there might be people who have expressive language in saying full sentences. There might be certain words they might be forgetful in saying vocabulary words. With the receptive part, it may be simply that you tell them something, they don't really understand multi-step instructions. Maybe they don't understand how to follow patterns or problems and solve issues and things like that, like in mathematics, because they are not able to receive and comprehend what you've told them.
Do you think that one of them is probably more important than the other? Like, having one of them would be more helpful to learning. Which one would that be?
For learning, I would say receptive language.
Receptive language,
And that's, again, because that's looking at how well you understand and comprehend what's being told to you.
An interesting thing about language for me is learning different things in a language that's not your first. And maybe it's interesting for me because this is, I've had to do this. So I come from Ghana, and there's so many languages. Some I don't even know about. But one of the most common ones is Tree, which I speak, very well. However, all of our education is in English. The fact that most people find very strange. They're like, "What? Why are you learning? How come you learn everything else in English?" And then I have to, explain that we have all of these languages. So I'm wondering if there are certain patterns or traits that you see
with those
with
who
people who learn in a language that's different from their first language.
Just I noticed or I see that it may take just a little bit longer for them to process certain things. Again, that's language based because they may have to take things in, translate it, understand it in some way, and then figure out how to respond or how can they comprehend it, or put it in a way that they understand it. They sometimes appear, students, they appear to be more motivated. I commend students who can take or learn in a language that is not their first language or not their native language in which they were taught early on, because it can be challenging to learn content, but then also you're learning content in a language in which you might not be strong in.
Exactly.
So these are very remarkable traits and things that are really good for those who are learning in a separate language.
And I know that systems are different in different places, but for some countries or for some educational systems, you start learning in whatever the formal language is right from, your childhood or whatever. So with time, you get better with it with time.
Right.
But I know that those who will start learning at a much later stage tend to struggle. So I know that in some, I mean, living in the United Arab Emirates, I know that there are some people who study in Arabic for a while and then
And they
much
switch
later in
over
middle
to-
school, exactly, they
right.
try to switch. So you realize there's a bigger challenge there, trying to get
Yeah, the challenge comes from not having a foundation in the second language.
absolutely.
And people say like younger children, the younger you are, the easier it is to learn a language, the easier it is to have those like language receptors really firing
Right.
in the brain.
Do you think that this affects the thinking pattern of the language learner, or does it affect the identity of the language learner in any way? So based on you sort of translate it in the language that you're more familiar with.
Yeah.
Whatever information is being given to you, you take it, translate it into the language you're familiar with, and then answer it based on your understanding. So probably the information that you're giving is, I don't know, it's gone through a process which
Right.
is
So unfortunately, sometimes in that process,
Yeah.
the integration and the understanding of it can be not as
lost
clear
somewhere.
and
Yes,
lost, yeah.
this is what well, it's something that I'm thinking of as opposed to someone who probably understands it
Right.
language like directly and doesn't necessarily have to
Do that whole process.
absolutely.
Right. So in terms of the thinking pattern, it may require them to have faster processing speeds, especially if they're in the classroom, because they need to process really quickly what the teacher's saying, translate it, do the whole kind of bit, and then return to the lecture and be able to keep up with that. Also, like their auditory processing, so being able to kind of discriminate between like needed information that may not be needed, especially like when their classmates are talking. All those are really important. That might
Okay.
influence the thinking of the learner. Unfortunately, I think when it comes to identity, some people may use the fact that they're being educated in a language that is not their first language. It's kind of like a crutch or like a excuse. Well, this is not in English, and so
Yes,
this is not in Arabic,
yes,
this is not English,
yes.
this is not in Spanish. So therefore, I don't have to do as well, or I won't do as well, and this can diminish their motivation for
course.
certain things.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. So how are you able to tell the difference between a student who's struggling with the language as opposed to a student, and this is very much in line with the point that you just made. So how do you know the student who's genuinely struggling with the language and can't make themselves understood as opposed to a student who really just can't be bothered or isn't putting in,
So someone who's
any
struggling
effort?
with content versus language.
Exactly. How do you draw the line and then you decide to sort of help them?
I can usually tell that
Okay.
someone may be if it's a content issue versus a language issue. If I have someone who speaks the native language, who I know is strong academically as well as in both language, if I have someone who can translate for them and explain the content, and
Okay.
then I ask them a question or I ask them something,
Okay.
and they still don't get it, then I
Right.
usually can kind of understand it's a content issue, that they're not getting the content.
Okay.
There are some students that after it's explained to them in Arabic or Spanish,
They
or
run with it.
they run with it, they're
Yeah.
fine, they get it, they say yes. Oh, you see the light bulb come on, they're like, oh, okay,
That's
I got
it.
it. But then there are some where they still are looking kind of like, what are you saying? So that's usually an indication that it's more of a content thing. They kind of still look lost.
Yeah, that's a good test to actually use, like to get someone to explain it to you in your local language or whatever language that you say that
Right.
you're familiar with.
And sometimes I'll ask students to do that, or did you explain it, or did someone explain it to you? And they'll
Yes.
say yes, or they'll say no. And then after, if they still don't get it, then it's kind of like, okay, let me see how else what's another method
I can get this.
of getting this information to them so they understand it.
I'm curious. Does this apply to, with all these difficulties? Does it apply just to, classroom learning, or, for example, would you have a hard time learning a song that's not in your native language, or a song in a language that you were struggling
That's a
with?
really great question. I think typically it's easier for people to learn like a song because there's
Okay.
a rhythm to it.
Yes.
Whereas when someone's telling you content, it's just some kind of like talking at you. But with a song, you can, pick up the rhythm, and even if you're just kind of making the sounds of the song, you will be able to say and get it.
So there's something else that's motivating you as opposed to plain speech,
True.
or plain words, or something like that.
So
Okay.
the rhythm that gets into you.
That's encouraging. I should learn a song in Arabic or something.
You should.
I'll see how fast I can learn that.
That'll be helpful.
Yeah. Another point of interest is about accents. Picking up accents in, like, accents of the native language speakers, of the language that you're trying to learn.
Okay.
Right? So, how difficult is it switching between? I feel like your native language or your first language kind of affects, or you sort of have an accent that affects how you speak other languages.
Yeah, so people who learn another language, they do speak with their accent, their native accent.
Exactly. So generally you can tell, even though they're speaking a different language, you can tell that you're probably from
some other place.
Exactly. Yeah. So having to switch between those two accents. So, for example, if you were speaking English with a British accent, exactly,
okay.
And then you had how does that affect
the learner, or
yes, or the speaker, for example? How does that?
Well, I think that for people who have to switch between different languages and different accents, it may affect when they are actually interacting with people from a different accent speaking the same language. So I'll give you an example. Imagine that you are someone who was raised in Mexico and you're speaking Spanish and you learned some English, you learned American English, and then you go to a place and you hear British accent, which is the same language, like they're speaking English as well, however their accent is different. So it may be confusing or challenging for the learner to pick up languages and words, especially when they're coming from a different English accent.
Right. Okay. Do you work with children who have learning disabilities or learning challenges a lot?
I did. Before, when I was in the schools, I worked with children who had ADHD, autism, Down syndrome, intellectual disabilities, a range of learning disabilities, and like expressive and receptive language disorders.
And I'm happy that you mentioned ADHD and autism, because these are, the prevalence rates are getting so much higher now. People are becoming aware of it, but you find more children having to deal with this, and then more parents having to help their children deal with this. How does this affect classroom learning, for example?
As you know, there's also a push for inclusion, and in the U.S. we have something that's called IDEA, which is basically all students have to be educated regardless of their disability. And so you usually have to put in place a program that will help them to learn. And with all things, you have to consider the developmental kind of stage of the individual when you are communicating and what language you use. So we're not talking, it may not be languages in like Spanish, Arabic, German, English, but it may be like a developmentally appropriate use of words with them. So someone having a developmental disorder, such as autism or Down syndrome or something like ADHD, you have to be mindful of the words that you're using, the language that you're using with them.
What's the full name for?
IDEA is Individuals with Disability Education Act, and I think the year is 2004. But basically, there came from this 5 key principles, and I'll just kind of highlight a few of those. One is that all students deserve a free and appropriate public education. And that students should be placed in the least restrictive environment for them. So if someone does have challenges or difficulties, they should not be placed in the classroom that's more severe than what they should be.
And have to compete with other people who don't have these challenges.
Who might have those who may not have those challenges, or may have more severe challenges than they have. So for example, someone has a learning disability, in math, you might not put them in a class that's for students who are like, intellectually disabled and have profound disabilities that affect their qualities of life. Also from the IDEA, there is the idea that parents have the right to know and be involved in the educational process of their students. So if there's a parent and they have questions about their students' performance, then they have the right to request an evaluation from outside. They have a right to go to the school and ask questions, and just be involved in the process in general.
Okay. My last question is this. I know that struggling in school can be emotionally taxing for the learner and for their parents, or for whoever it is who's supporting them, whoever it is that they consider their immediate support. What kind of help or what kind of assistance do you give to them, to kind of help them or improve their emotional health them with regards to these kinds of challenges?
Unfortunately, there are people that may struggle within the school setting. And oftentimes it requires a bit of awareness about what is this. So we do like some psychoeducation about what is anxiety, or what is depression or sadness, and when is it becoming too much for you. So just all of these pieces about these kind of key emotional concerns that someone might have, as well as just understanding when you do feel overwhelmed. Maybe it's not like something as severe, pronounced like anxiety or something, but just a feeling of overwhelmness.
Of course.
And so you do like some psychoeducation. Maybe you'll have like relaxation techniques for that, or for anxiety, or maybe you'll have different groups or different strategies and help people to understand that there are other people that may have similar issues and they're not the only one, because a lot of people think, oh, it's just me, why do I feel like this? So you may have like a group setting and group interventions. People learn a lot from others.
They do.
We are
And they
very
get
social,
comfortable also.
and they do get comfortable, and they get like more open to differences that can exist.
Yes, and I think they sort of overcome that sense of isolation. Like you rightly mentioned, that this isn't just me. There are other people
who may have the same or similar concerns. Exactly. And
Exactly.
it can create a bond and can motivate people to help each other and help one another. Also, there might be like doing individual therapy is something that I used to do in the schools. So actually working with an individual one-on-one, maybe doing family therapy, helping families to understand what children or individuals may be going through, whether it's like a language issue, a learning issue, just a personal kind of family or issue.
Okay. That's good to know. You're doing a great job, Dr. Bridget Cody. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing the work that you're doing.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Hopefully you can join us again in the future and share
I would love
some
to.
breakthroughs or some inspiring stories with some of your patients. Of course, if they give us the permission to use their stories.
Yes, I would definitely be open to that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You do the same. So the conversation got me thinking about my time in school, some of the challenges I had with learning, some of the struggles that my friends had, and I realized that things would have been so different, so much easier, if you will, if I had better perspective, or if the people who were teaching had a different perspective and, understood what they were doing a bit better. Anyway, no need crying over spilt milk. It's just to share experiences and, of course, understand that when you know better, you definitely do better. I shared experiences with different people on the street, if you will, and I would encourage that you join in next week to listen, because some of them were hilarious, but also very insightful. I think that there's so much to pick up there, and then who knows what we didn't get in the classroom we can help our children and the children around us have. My name is Baba Dadzi, and you've been listening to Hearts and Minds Aloud. If you haven't already, subscribe, rate, and like this podcast. We're on Instagram and Facebook as Hearts and Minds Aloud. Thank you for listening. The conversation is getting bigger, so be here next week.